Hey guys, today I want to do a mini deep dive on the two different ways royalty participants might get paid on a Broadway show. Now, backing up, who gets paid by a royalty on a Broadway show? Well, for the most part, it's going to be your authors, your director, your producers, sometimes an originating theater, and sometimes designers. And collectively, they all get paid out a percentage of either the gross or the weekly profit. And that's what I want to look at today, those two different ways of paying out royalties. Now, as I've mentioned on previous videos, all of our accounting on Broadway is done by the week. So I'm going to pull up my iPad and let's look at some example numbers for a show that just finished playing a week on Broadway. All right, so I have my iPad up, and let's say in this example, and we're going to keep all these numbers really round and clean, my show had gross receipts of $1,100,000. And on this week, my expenses were a clean $1 million. So if we're following along here, this week, my show had a profit of $100,000. Pretty simple so far. So let's look at way number one that royalty participants might get paid, and that is paying off the gross. Now, on a Broadway show, the full amount that all of the royalty participants collectively might get paid off the gross is about 15%. It's going to be a little less on some shows, a little bit more, but for today's purposes, let's just call it a clean 15%. And again, that's going to encompass everyone who's a royalty holder. So let's just write 15% over here. And again, we're going to calculate that 15% off the gross. So if we're following along, 15% of 1.1 million is going to be $165,000. Now that $165,000 is paid on top of the expenses. So if you're following along, before royalties, I had a profit of $100,000. But I now have to subtract out that $165,000 in royalties, and that means I'm left with a loss for this week of $65,000. So what happened there was, on this given week, because of the royalty exposure on the show went from a profit to a loss. Well, everyone kind of put their heads together and realized this is not a good situation for anyone. It's not a good situation for the investors who want the show to run as long as possible. It's also not a good situation for everyone in the royalty pool, because now their show is going to close earlier. And just like investors, directors, and designers and producers want their show to run as long as possible. So they realized, well, there's always a gross, but there's not always a profit. So maybe we can find a way to pay royalties in a way that's more fair to everyone and gives the show the best chance to stay open. So they came up with an alternate model for calculating royalties. And I should say, we still use the gross model a lot of the time, and I'll do a whole other video where I break down when it's better to pay off the gross versus profit. But for now, let's just look at the alternate model for calculating royalties, which is based on weekly net operating profit. Now, in this instance, the total royalties is probably going to be closer to 35% on a typical show. Now, you may have noticed I'm at 15% when I pay off the gross, but 35% when I pay off the profit. And that's because the gross is always going to be more substantial than the profit. So in exchange for going along for this, we have to give people an increased share of the profit, since there's less of it than the gross. So in this example, I'm going to use 35%, which again is about average for a Broadway show. So 35%, and again, I'm going to calculate that now off of the profit, and that's going to be $35,000 for this week. So same situation, same exact week. Instead of paying $165,000 in royalties, I am paying $35,000 in royalties. Now, I still have to subtract that $35,000 from the $100,000, but that gives me a profit of $65,000. So a lot of the time, it's going to be better for the show and frankly everyone to pay off the weekly net operating profit model. There are times when it's better to pay off the gross, and again, I'm going to cover that in an entirely different video. But there's one more thing I want to mention about the weekly net operating profit model, and you may have heard of this acronym before: minimum weekly guarantee. So in exchange for switching to a net operating profit model, we also have to give all of the royalty participants a minimum weekly guarantee, because while there's always a gross, there's not always a profit. And it's not fair to ask the royalty participants to not get paid while everyone else on the show is getting paid, including your actors, the theater owners, the vendors. So we come up with the minimum weekly guarantee that we're minimally going to pay out to all royalty participants, whether there's a profit or not. And that's because we can't ask the royalty participants to bear the full burden of keeping a show afloat. And what is the collective minimum weekly guarantee? Well, on a Broadway show, it's probably going to hover somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 a week. That number can vary by a wide margin, but that's about what we're going to find on most Broadway shows. So that is a very cursory rundown of how royalties are paid on a Broadway show and the two different ways we might pay out royalties. If you have other questions about royalties, or really other questions you have about producing in New York, on Broadway, off-Broadway, please let me know in the comments below. We want to be recording a bunch of videos to guide you through the process of producing in New York. So let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what we can answer for you. Thanks so much.